The old convent stood on the edge of a quiet town where time seemed to move a little slower. Its walls were covered with vines, and the soft sound of bells often floated through the air. Inside the convent lived a small group of nuns who spent their days teaching children, helping the poor, and keeping the old chapel bright and peaceful. Among them was an elderly nun named Sister Agnes. She had been there longer than anyone else could remember. Her face was full of gentle lines, her eyes calm and kind. She walked slowly, always smiling, and rarely spoke unless someone asked her something. Most of the younger nuns saw her as a simple woman who had lived her whole life inside those walls. She was always folding laundry, watering flowers, or cleaning the wooden benches in the chapel. She seemed happy with small things, but no one really knew much about her past. She never talked about what her life had been like before joining the convent many years ago. One morning, excitement filled the convent because a delivery truck stopped in front of the chapel. The nuns gathered outside to see what was happening. A shiny black piano was being carried carefully into the hall. The Mother Superior had arranged for it to be donated by a local family so that the convent's young choir could practice music. It looked beautiful, with its smooth surface reflecting the sunlight coming through the tall windows. The younger nuns clapped and smiled as the piano was placed in the corner of the hall. They were eager to learn new songs and prepare for the upcoming Easter celebration. The sound of laughter filled the room as one of them tried a few notes. The melody echoed warmly across the chapel, making everyone cheerful. Sister Agnes stood near the back, quietly watching. Her eyes softened as she looked at the instrument. For a long moment she said nothing. But something in her heart stirred, a memory, faint but alive. She had not seen or touched a piano in many, many years. It felt almost like seeing an old friend after decades. When the others had finished admiring the piano, she slowly walked closer. She placed her hand gently on the polished wood and smiled faintly. Her fingers trembled slightly as they brushed across the keys. "Oh, Sister Agnes, do you play?" one of the young nuns asked with a kind laugh. Sister Agnes nodded slowly. "A little," she said softly. The younger nun smiled politely. "That's lovely. But we're saving it for the children's choir. They'll be using it for their lessons." Sister Agnes simply nodded again. "Of course," she whispered, stepping back with a gentle smile. No one noticed the faint sadness in her eyes. She didn't say anything more. The others went back to their work, chatting and laughing while she returned to her small room near the end of the corridor. That night, long after the lights were turned off, Sister Agnes couldn't sleep. She sat by the window of her small room, listening to the sound of the wind. She thought about the piano. Her hands ached slightly from age, but her fingers still felt the shape of the keys in her memory. She remembered another life, a young girl sitting on a stage, her heart racing as she played before a crowd. She had been so young then, full of dreams. Music had been her whole world once. Every note she played had felt like a piece of her soul. But that was long ago, before she chose a different path. The next day, the young choir began practicing. Their voices filled the chapel with soft hymns. The piano was played by a young nun named Sister Clara, who was learning to read sheet music. She often stumbled, laughing when she hit the wrong notes. The children didn't mind. They loved being part of the music. Sister Agnes helped them by handing out water and tidying up after practice. She stayed quiet, but her eyes followed the piano every time. When no one was looking, she would hum softly to herself, old melodies that no one else knew. Weeks passed like this. Every morning she did her chores quietly. She swept the corridors, arranged flowers near the altar, and made tea for the other sisters. The others often told her how graceful she was, how peaceful. But inside there was a part of her that missed something deeply. She didn't regret her life, but she sometimes wondered what might have been if she had continued playing. One afternoon, as the sunlight poured through the stained glass windows, the children left early after choir practice. The chapel was empty except for Sister Agnes. She stood near the piano alone. She looked around, making sure no one was watching. Then very slowly she sat down on the bench. Her heart beat faster as her fingers hovered above the keys. For a moment she hesitated. Then she pressed one note. It rang out clearly. She smiled, closing her eyes. Her hands began to move on their own, finding a melody she had not played in more than 50 years. It was gentle and pure, filled with emotion. The sound floated through the hall, soft but full of life. For a few minutes, time stopped. She forgot her age, the years of silence, the walls of the convent. She was no longer the elderly nun everyone thought she was. She was once again the girl who played music because her heart needed to. Then the door creaked open. Startled, she stopped playing. Sister Clara stood at the entrance looking surprised. "Oh, I'm sorry," Clara said quickly. "I didn't mean to interrupt." Sister Agnes smiled gently. "You didn't, I was just—" remembering. Clara hesitated. "That was beautiful. You play so well." Sister Agnes shook her head lightly. "It's just an old song." She stood up slowly and moved aside. "You should practice now." But Clara couldn't stop thinking about what she had heard. Later she mentioned it to the other nuns. Some were surprised, others amused. "Sister Agnes used to play the piano?" They whispered among themselves. Who would have guessed? The next day, during lunch, a few of them asked her about it. "Is it true you used to be a musician?" One of them said with curiosity. Sister Agnes smiled softly. "I used to love music," she said. "That's all." They asked more questions, but she only gave short answers. She didn't like talking about herself. After a while, they stopped asking. To them, it was just an interesting bit of gossip, something to talk about for a few days. To her, it was a part of her soul that she had long kept hidden. That evening, Father Thomas, the priest who often visited the convent, came by to lead the evening prayer. He had known Sister Agnes for years and respected her deeply. After the prayer, he found her cleaning near the back of the chapel. "Sister," he said kindly, "I heard something interesting today. They say you play the piano?" She smiled, not surprised that the rumor had reached him too. "I used to," she said quietly. He tilted his head. "Used to? You mean before you joined the convent?" "Yes," she said. "Before everything changed." Father Thomas looked thoughtful. "You must have been very good." She smiled again, but her eyes looked far away. "I was a student once at a music school," she said. "I wanted to perform, to travel, to share music. But I found another calling. Sometimes I think the two are not so different. Music can also be prayer." He nodded slowly, understanding. "Perhaps you can still share it," he said gently. She looked at him, her expression calm. "Perhaps. But some doors are meant to stay closed." He didn't argue. He just smiled kindly and left her to her thoughts. That night she sat again by her window looking at the stars. She remembered her teacher's voice from long ago, telling her that true music came from the heart, not from fame. She had believed that deeply, and even now she still did. Maybe that was why she could never fully let it go. Days turned into weeks. The choir practiced for an upcoming church event, and Sister Agnes continued to help quietly in the background. The younger nuns grew busy preparing decorations, rehearsing songs, and organizing guests. The air was full of excitement. One afternoon, the choir leader came into the hall to find that the piano cover was missing. Sister Agnes had cleaned it for them, polishing it until it shone. The leader thanked her politely, then added, "Please don't use it for practice, sister. It's for the children." Sister Agnes nodded with her gentle smile. "I understand." She said nothing more. But when night came again, she went into the chapel after everyone had gone to sleep. The candles flickered softly, and the moonlight fell across the piano. She sat down once more and began to play, her eyes closed. The melody was slow, tender, and full of peace. It was as if she was speaking to God through sound instead of words. She didn't notice that Father Thomas was standing quietly by the doorway, listening. He said nothing, not wanting to disturb her. He simply watched her hands glide across the keys, graceful and sure, as if the years had melted away. When she finished, she whispered something under her breath, a simple prayer of thanks. Father Thomas smiled quietly and left without a word. He knew then that this was more than music. It was something sacred. In the days that followed, the choir continued their practice, unaware that every night the piano came alive in secret under Sister Agnes's fingers. She didn't play for anyone else. She played for the memory of who she once was and for the peace it gave her soul. Sometimes, while cleaning the chapel in the morning, she would glance at the piano and smile, remembering the sound from the night before. She didn't need an audience. The music itself was enough. Yet though she never said it aloud, she wished just once that she could share that music again. Not for glory, not for attention, but to remind the world that beauty can live quietly, even in places no one thinks to look. She didn't know that soon. That wish would come true in a way she could never have imagined. Days turned into weeks, and life inside the old convent continued in its calm rhythm. The mornings were filled with the sound of bells, footsteps on the stone floor, and quiet prayers. The nuns moved through their routines with soft smiles, always busy yet peaceful. Outside, winter had begun to melt into spring, and the air smelled fresh again. Flowers were starting to bloom in the convent garden, and the sound of birds returned to the trees near the chapel. Sister Agnes spent most of her mornings helping the young children from the nearby school who came for lessons. She taught them to read, to write, and to be kind. The children liked her gentle way of speaking. She never raised her voice, and she always found a way to make them laugh with her quiet humor. They brought her little drawings as gifts, and she kept them in a small box beside her bed. Yet behind that calm smile, there was still a small part of her heart that longed for something she had left behind long ago. Every time she passed by the piano in the chapel, she felt a tug inside her chest. She still played it secretly at night when everyone else slept, and the music helped her feel alive. But she never told anyone about it. It was her private world, hidden from the noise of the day. One morning, a new face arrived at the convent. It was Father Thomas, a priest who often visited from the nearby parish, but this time, he stayed for several days. He was known for his warm manner and his deep respect for the sisters. He often spoke about kindness, humility, and how every person carried a small light meant to shine in the world. During lunch, the sisters talked excitedly about the upcoming charity festival in the town. The mayor had invited several schools and groups to take part. The convent's choir was also asked to perform. Everyone was thrilled because it was a chance to help raise money for the orphanage. The younger nuns were eager to show what they had been practicing. Father Thomas smiled and said it would be a wonderful opportunity to bring joy to people. Then his eyes rested on Sister Agnes, who was sitting quietly at the end of the table, listening but not speaking. "You'll all be performing together?" he asked. The choir leader nodded. "Yes, Father. We've been preparing for weeks." "That's good," he said. "Music brings people closer to heaven." Then he turned to Sister Agnes. "And you, Sister Agnes, do you also take part?" She smiled softly. "Oh no, Father. I only help with the children and the flowers. The music belongs to the younger ones now." He looked at her for a moment as if he could see something hidden behind her quiet tone. "I'm sure the music still lives in you," he said kindly. She only smiled again and lowered her eyes, not answering. Later that day, while everyone was busy preparing decorations for the coming festival, Father Thomas walked into the empty chapel. The sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, painting colors on the floor. He saw the piano sitting quietly in its corner and walked closer. He remembered hearing a faint melody weeks earlier when he had visited one night. He hadn't told anyone about it, but he was sure it had been Sister Agnes. The way she touched the keys, the way the notes rose gently, had stayed in his mind ever since. He sat down on a bench nearby and waited. He knew that around this time, after evening prayers, Sister Agnes often came to tidy the chapel. Soon he heard her footsteps. She carried a small basket of candles and began to replace the burnt ones near the altar. "Good evening, Sister," he said softly. She turned, surprised but smiling. "Good evening, Father. I didn't see you there." He nodded toward the piano. "It's a beautiful instrument, isn't it?" "Yes," she said quietly. "It is." He hesitated, then asked, "Would you play something for me?" She froze for a moment, her hand still holding the basket. "Oh, I couldn't," she said. "It has been too long." "I don't believe that," he said gently. "Music doesn't fade from a heart like yours." She smiled politely, trying to avoid his eyes. "It's better if I don't. The others would prefer I didn't touch it." He nodded slowly, understanding her meaning. "Then maybe someday, when no one minds, you will play again." "I hope I'm here to hear it." She didn't answer. She placed the candles on the altar and walked quietly out of the chapel. The following week, the convent was filled with even more excitement as the day of the festival drew closer. The younger nuns practiced every afternoon. The children rehearsed their songs and laughter filled the air. But as the day came nearer, the choir leader began to worry. The songs didn't sound right. The timing was off and the children kept forgetting their parts. Sister Agnes watched from the back of the room, listening. She could hear where the rhythm broke, where the melody lost its feeling. Finally, when the choir took a break, she walked over softly. "If you let the children feel the song instead of counting it, they'll sing better," she said kindly. The choir leader looked at her curiously. Feel it? She nodded. Music is not just notes on paper. You have to make them believe the song belongs to them. The leader hesitated but decided to try her advice. When the children returned, she told them to think about what the words meant, to sing like they were telling a story instead of following a rule. The change was immediate. The melody became smoother, the voices softer and more emotional. Everyone noticed. Father Thomas, who was standing nearby, smiled. You see, he said to the choir leader, sometimes wisdom hides in the quietest corners. That night, when the children had left, Sister Agnes stayed behind to tidy the room. Father Thomas approached her again. You helped them, he said. You still carry music in your heart even if you think you don't. She smiled faintly. It's only a small thing. I'm happy to help. He looked at her thoughtfully. You remind me that talent doesn't disappear, it just waits for the right moment to return. She didn't know what to say. She only nodded and returned to her cleaning, but his words stayed with her. That night when she sat in her room, she kept thinking about what he had said. Maybe music was still waiting inside her after all these years. The next morning, the convent received a letter confirming their slot in the festival. They would perform in front of a large audience at the town's community hall. The nuns were thrilled and the children were nervous but excited. Sister Agnes congratulated them and helped prepare their white robes. A few days later, while they were all practicing, the choir leader suddenly asked, Sister Agnes, why don't you sit with us and play the piano just once? Maybe the children will learn from watching you. The room grew quiet. Everyone turned to look at her. She smiled politely but shook her head. Oh no, dear. My hands are too old now. You play very well yourself, but the leader insisted kindly. Please, just once. For the children, she hesitated. The memory of those long-ago melodies came rushing back. Slowly, she walked toward the piano. The children watched with wide eyes. She sat down, placed her hands on the keys, and began to play a short piece. Soft, simple, but full of warmth. The room went silent. Every child stopped moving, listening to the sound that seemed to come from another time. When she finished, no one spoke for a few seconds. That was beautiful, one of the children whispered. Sister Agnes smiled and stood up. Now it's your turn, she said kindly. From that day, the children worked harder. They wanted to play like her, to feel the music as she did. The choir improved quickly and the songs became alive with emotion. Even the choir leader admitted she had never seen such progress in so little time. But as the day of the festival drew nearer, a new problem arose. The program required a short piano solo to fill a gap between performances, and the organizers asked if the convent could provide one. The choir leader immediately thought of Sister Agnes. She went to her room and knocked gently. Sister Agnes, the festival needs a short piano solo. I thought maybe you. Before she could finish, Sister Agnes shook her head. No, my dear, I can't. It's been too long, and this event is for the young ones, not for someone like me. The leader looked disappointed but didn't argue. She thanked her and left. When Father Thomas heard about it, he found Sister Agnes in the garden. She was watering the small rose bushes, her hands steady despite her age. Why won't you play? He asked kindly. The people would love to hear you, she smiled faintly. I have already had my time, Father. This is their moment now, he sighed softly. Maybe, but sometimes the world still needs to hear an old song. She didn't reply. She just looked up at the sky and said quietly, If it is meant to happen, it will. As the festival day approached, the convent buzzed with energy. The children practiced their songs until their voices grew tired. The nuns sewed their costumes and packed the instruments. Everyone was ready, except for the small piano solo, which was still missing from the schedule. Father Thomas wanted to suggest again that Sister Agnes perform, but he decided not to push her. He trusted that if the right moment came, she would know. On the evening before the festival, the convent was quiet. Most of the nuns had gone to rest early. The sky outside was dark and a soft rain began to fall. In the empty chapel, Sister Agnes sat once again at the piano. Her fingers touched the keys softly and a familiar melody filled the air. She played with her eyes closed, not knowing that Father Thomas was standing by the door, listening once more. When she finished, he said softly, That music belongs on a stage tomorrow. She turned toward him and smiled. Maybe it belongs only here, she said. He shook his head gently. No, sister. Beauty like that belongs to everyone. She didn't answer, but his words echoed in her mind long after he left. That night, before going to bed, she prayed. The morning of the charity festival arrived with bright sunlight pouring through the convent windows. The sky was clear, the air fresh, and the birds sang loudly in the trees outside. The sisters moved quickly that morning, carrying boxes, adjusting robes, and preparing the children for the long day ahead. The sound of excitement filled the hall as everyone got ready to leave for the event. Sister Agnes woke up early as usual. She looked calm, but her heart carried a quiet heaviness. She had decided she would not play at the festival. It was the younger sister's time, not hers. She told herself she was happy just to help. She ironed the choir's white gowns and packed some food for the children. She tied each ribbon neatly, making sure everything looked perfect. Father Thomas arrived soon after breakfast, cheerful and full of energy. "Is everyone ready?" he asked, his voice echoing down the corridor. "Yes, Father," one of the nuns replied. "We will leave in 15 minutes. He smiled, but when he passed Sister Agnes, he stopped for a brief moment. "You will come too, won't you?" She nodded gently. "Of course. I'll sit with the children." He hesitated for a second, as if he wanted to say something more, but then simply smiled and walked away. The convent bus soon rolled down the narrow road toward the town. The children sang softly during the ride, their excitement clear in their voices. The older nuns smiled, clapping along with them. Sister Agnes sat by the window, her hands folded in her lap, looking outside as the trees and houses passed by. She was happy for them, but inside a small voice whispered that something about today felt different. The community hall was already crowded when they arrived. Banners hung from the walls and people filled every seat. The air buzzed with energy as different groups prepared for their turn on stage. There were choirs, young musicians, and even a group of elderly men playing violins. Everyone seemed to be part of something joyful. The convent choir was scheduled to perform in the middle of the program. The children looked nervous as they saw the large crowd. Sister Agnes helped them fix their robes and whispered softly, "Just sing with your hearts and everything will be fine." When it was finally their turn, the children climbed onto the stage with the young nun standing behind them. The piano sat at the center, shining under the bright lights. The choir leader sat down to play while the children began their song. The first few notes sounded soft but steady, but as the piece continued, something began to go wrong. One of the younger girls forgot her line. The timing slipped. The piano lost rhythm. The melody started to fall apart. The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some people whispered. The children looked frightened, their eyes darting to the choir leader who tried to recover but couldn't find the right key. The moment felt endless. Sister Agnes, sitting among the nuns, could feel the children's panic. Her hands tightened around the edge of her seat. The music was collapsing and the faces of the young nuns turned pale. The children's confidence was fading fast. Father Thomas, standing near the stage, could see the tension. He glanced toward Sister Agnes and saw her expression. Her eyes were fixed on the piano, full of concern and something else, something deep and restless. When the song finally ended, the applause was thin and uncertain. The children walked off the stage with lowered heads. The choir leader looked near tears. The air in the hall felt heavy with disappointment. Father Thomas quickly stepped forward to speak into the microphone. "Thank you to our young choir for their beautiful effort," he said warmly, trying to lift the mood. But the audience could feel his effort to cover the awkwardness. He looked around and then, almost as if moved by a sudden idea, he said, "Before we continue, perhaps we could hear something special. Sister Agnes, would you honor us with a small piece on the piano?" The room fell silent. Sister Agnes froze. For a moment she thought she had misheard him. Everyone turned toward her. The other nuns looked shocked. The children's eyes widened in surprise. She shook her head slightly, her face turning pale. "Oh no, Father," she said quietly. "Please, I couldn't." But he smiled gently and said, "Please, sister. I believe this moment was meant for you." The audience waited, curious. Some smiled kindly while others seemed amused. An elderly nun playing the piano in front of hundreds of people. It sounded almost unbelievable. A few chuckled softly, thinking it was a light-hearted moment to ease the tension. Sister Agnes felt her heart beating fast. For a brief moment she wanted to refuse again, but something deep inside her whispered that maybe this was what she had prayed for. Maybe this was the moment she had been waiting for all these years. She stood up slowly. The hall went completely quiet. Even the sound of chairs stopped. She walked toward the stage with small, careful steps. Her white habit swayed lightly as she moved. The lights above made her silver hair glow softly. When she reached the piano, she looked at it for a long moment before sitting down. Her fingers trembled as she placed them on the keys. She took a slow breath, closed her eyes, and let her heart lead her. The first note rang out clear and gentle. The second followed smoother and softer. The melody began like a whisper, almost fragile. The crowd leaned forward, curious. Then, little by little, her hands grew steadier, her movements more fluid. The music filled the hall, flowing like water. It wasn't just sound. It was emotion, pure, real, and full of life. Every note told a story. There was sadness, hope, love, and peace woven into her playing. Her fingers moved gracefully, faster now then softer again, as if speaking a language no words could express. The people who had chuckled before now sat silent, their eyes fixed on her. The children at the side of the stage forgot to breathe. The other nuns watched with tears gathering in their eyes. Even Father Thomas stood still, his face glowing with quiet joy. The melody grew richer, building like a wave before gently fading into stillness. The final notes hung in the air, tender and slow until they disappeared into silence. For a few seconds, no one moved. It felt as if time itself had stopped. Then suddenly the hall erupted into applause. The audience stood up, clapping louder and louder. Some people were crying. Others smiled through their tears. Sister Agnes sat still, her head bowed slightly, her hands resting gently on the piano keys. She looked almost surprised by the reaction. Then she smiled, a small, humble smile that carried years of quiet grace. When she finally stood up, the applause grew even louder. Father Thomas walked onto the stage, his eyes shining. "You have reminded us," he said into the microphone, "that true beauty never fades. It only waits for the right moment to be heard again." The crowd cheered once more. Sister Agnes gave a small nod and walked off the stage. As she passed the children, they reached out to touch her hands. One little girl whispered, "You played like an angel." Backstage, the choir leader ran up to her, eyes wide with emotion. "Why didn't you tell us you could play like that?" she said breathlessly. Sister Agnes smiled softly. "Because I had forgotten what it felt like," she said. "Until now." After the performance, many people came to speak to her. Some thanked her for the music. Others asked about her story, where she had learned to play like that. She answered only briefly and kindly, never taking any credit for herself. "It is just a gift," she said quietly. "And gifts are meant to be shared." That night, after the festival ended and everyone returned to the convent, the sisters gathered in the small dining hall, still full of excitement. They couldn't stop talking about what had happened. The children were glowing with pride. Even though their choir performance had faltered, they no longer cared. They had been part of something unforgettable. Father Thomas raised his cup of tea and said, "Today we learned that talent is not about age or recognition. It's about the soul behind it." Everyone nodded. They looked at Sister Agnes with admiration. She smiled shyly, as if unsure what to do with so much attention. "It was only music," she said quietly. "But maybe it was meant to remind us that beauty can come from anywhere, even from someone who thought her time had passed." When the night grew quiet and everyone went to bed, Sister Agnes sat once more by her window. The moonlight fell gently across her face. She thought about the applause, the faces in the crowd, and the music that had filled the hall. It all felt like a dream. She whispered softly to herself, "Thank you for letting me play again." Down below, the piano sat silently in the dark chapel, its keys still carrying the warmth of her hands. The world outside had changed a little that night. A forgotten melody had found its way back to life, and so had she. The morning after the festival was calm and quiet. The convent felt different that day, lighter somehow. The air carried a soft sense of peace, as if something good had touched everyone's heart. The sisters moved through their usual routines, but they smiled more. The children hummed as they worked, still remembering the music that had filled the hall the night before. Sister Agnes sat by the window again, holding a cup of tea. Sunlight spilled across the table, and the smell of freshly baked bread drifted from the kitchen. She looked outside at the garden where the children were playing, their laughter echoing through the air. It made her smile, but there was still a quiet thought deep inside her mind. She could not stop thinking about the sound of the piano, the feeling of the keys under her fingers, and the faces of the people who had listened. She had not felt that alive in years. When Father Thomas entered the room, he greeted her with his usual kind smile. "You look peaceful this morning," he said gently. "I feel different," she admitted softly, "as if something I thought was gone has come back." He nodded. "Your music touched many hearts yesterday. People were still talking about it when I left the hall. Some said they hadn't felt that kind of emotion in years." She looked a bit surprised. It was only a small performance. He smiled again. It was not small to them. He reminded everyone what true grace looks like. She didn't know what to say, so she simply bowed her head and whispered, "It was not me. It was something greater." As the days passed, word about her performance began to spread quietly through the town. People who had attended the festival told others about the elderly nun, who had played with such beauty that it had brought tears to their eyes. Some said her music felt like a prayer. Others said it reminded them of memories they had long forgotten. One afternoon, a young woman from the local community arrived at the convent door. She worked as a music teacher at a nearby school. When she saw Sister Agnes, she smiled and said, "I heard you play at the festival. I was there that night. It was one of the most moving performances I've ever heard." Sister Agnes was shy and tried to wave it off. But the young woman continued, "I wonder if you would consider visiting the school one day to speak to the children. Many of them are losing interest in music. Maybe your story could inspire them." Sister Agnes hesitated. "I don't know if I'm the right person," she said gently. But the young woman smiled kindly. "You are exactly the right person." After a long pause, Sister Agnes finally nodded. "If it can help the children, I will go." A few days later, the convent arranged for her to visit the school. The children there were bright and full of energy, though many seemed distracted by modern things. Music to them was something they heard on phones or in videos, not something they truly felt. When Sister Agnes walked in, they looked curious but unsure what to expect. She sat at the piano in the school hall, the same way she had done all her life, calm and humble. She began by speaking softly to them. "When I was your age, music was a way to speak without words," she said. "It didn't matter if you were rich or poor. When you played from your heart, everyone understood." The children listened quietly. Then she began to play a simple tune, soft, gentle, and full of emotion. The sound filled the room, and soon even the most restless children fell silent. They could feel something they couldn't explain. The melody wasn't fast or loud, but it had warmth, the kind that made them want to listen forever. When she finished, one little boy raised his hand and asked, "How did you learn to play like that?" She smiled. "By listening," she said, "not just to the notes, but to life. Every joy, every sadness, every small thing you notice, it all becomes part of the music." After that day, the school invited her again and again. She became a quiet inspiration to many young students. Some of them even started learning piano seriously because of her. The music teacher told her, "You've done more for these children in 1 week than we've managed all year." Back at the convent, life continued as usual, but people often visited to meet her now. Some came just to listen to her play for a few minutes. Others came with questions about life and faith. She always welcomed them kindly, speaking with the same softness that had always been part of her nature. Yet even with all the attention, she remained humble. She never saw herself as special. "I am just a servant," she would say quietly. "The gift belongs to the one who gave it." One evening, as she sat at the piano alone in the chapel, Father Thomas walked in quietly and stood near the door, listening. The light from a single candle flickered across the piano. Her music was slower that night, thoughtful, almost like a prayer. When she stopped, he said softly, "You have brought new life to this place, sister." She turned and smiled faintly. "I only played what was already inside me." He nodded. "And that is what makes it beautiful." Months passed, and the small story of her festival performance slowly grew beyond the town. Someone who had filmed a short clip of her playing had shared it online. They had done it simply because they were moved by the performance. The video began to spread quietly. People around the country started watching it. Many commented how deeply it touched them. "Her music feels like peace," one person wrote. "It made me cry. And I don't even know why," said another. "Reminds me of my grandmother, who used to play for us before bed." someone else added. Within a few weeks, the video had reached hundreds of thousands of people. News reporters contacted the convent asking to meet the nun who had moved the world with her piano. The sisters were surprised, and some were unsure if it was the right kind of attention. But when Father Thomas asked Sister Agnes what she thought, she smiled quietly and said, "If it helps people feel hope, then it is good." So one morning, a small group of journalists arrived at the convent. They were polite and respectful. They set up their cameras in the chapel, and the room filled with soft light. The interviewer asked her simple questions about her life, her music, and what inspired her. She answered gently. "Music is prayer for me," she said. "When I play, I speak to God, and sometimes maybe others can hear that conversation." When she played again for them, the cameraman, who had seen thousands of performances, stood still. Her music filled the room the same way it had that night at the festival, calm, pure, and full of heart. When the video was aired, it reached millions. People from around the world wrote letters to the convent. Some thanked her for bringing peace into their lives. Others said they had decided to start playing again after years of giving up. Even people who had never believed in faith said they felt something spiritual in her music. The convent received flowers, letters, and gifts, but Sister Agnes never wanted any of it for herself. She asked that all donations be used for the children's education and for helping the poor. "That is where beauty truly belongs," she said softly. One evening, she was sitting outside on a wooden bench watching the sunset. The sky was painted with orange and gold. The same young music teacher who had first invited her to the school came to visit. She sat beside her and said, "Do you know that your music has changed so many lives?" Sister Agnes smiled, her eyes still on the horizon. "Music does that," she said. "Not me." The young woman looked at her and said, "Maybe. But it takes someone like you to remind the world to listen again." They sat together in silence for a while, watching the colors fade into night. A soft wind rustled through the trees, and the sound almost felt like a gentle song. As the stars appeared, Sister Agnes whispered, "When I was young, I used to dream of playing on great stages. But now I see, the greatest stage is the human heart. That is where the music belongs." The young woman smiled, holding back tears. "That's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard," she said softly. Sister Agnes looked up at the first star of the evening. "Every person carries a song," she said. "Most just forget to listen to it. But one day something reminds them. And when it does, they remember who they are." That night, when she returned to her room, she sat at her small wooden desk and opened her old notebook. Inside were pieces of music she had written years ago and never finished. She took her pencil and began to write again, her hands moving slowly but surely. She wanted to leave behind something for others, something simple and full of light. As she wrote, the moonlight fell gently across the page. The sound of the distant piano echoed faintly from the chapel, played by one of the younger sisters who was now learning from her. She smiled as she listened. It was as if her song had found new voices, new hearts to live in. She closed her notebook softly and whispered, "Now it belongs to them." Outside, the wind carried the faint sound of the piano into the night, and the convent lights glowed warmly against the dark sky. The world beyond was still full of noise and rush, but in that small corner of peace, an old melody continued to live, simple, gentle, and eternal. The morning sun poured softly through the convent windows, warming the stone floor and the air that smelled faintly of flowers and candle wax. Life in the convent went on quietly, but everything felt changed since that performance. The sisters seemed happier. The children sang louder and visitors came more often. The small world of that old convent had somehow opened its doors to the hearts of millions. The video of Sister Agnes playing the piano had traveled far beyond their little town. It had reached countries she had never heard of. People watched. Her wrinkled hands moved gently across the keys and felt something in their hearts they could not explain. Some said it was peace. Some said it was love. Others said it was the reminder that beauty never grows old. Letters began to arrive every day. The convent postbox overflowed with envelopes from around the world. Many people wrote to say thank you. Some wrote about their own lives, their lost dreams, and how seeing her play made them want to try again. A man from a city far away wrote, "I had not spoken to my mother in 10 years. After watching you, I called her. Thank you. Another letter came from a young woman who said she had stopped playing piano after losing her sight, but now she had started again, guided only by touch and memory. The sisters would gather in the evenings and read the letters aloud in the dining hall. There was laughter and sometimes quiet tears. Sister Agnes would listen, smiling softly, her eyes shining but calm. Each word is a blessing, she would say. It shows that good things can still travel far. Reporters kept asking for interviews, but she politely refused most of them. She didn't want attention or fame. She told Father Thomas, "I'm just an old woman who played a song. The rest is not mine." He smiled kindly. "Maybe that's why people listen," he said. Soon the convent began receiving calls from people who wanted to visit, not just to meet her, but to see the place where the music was born. The sisters agreed to let visitors come once a week. On those days, the small chapel would fill with people, families, children, musicians, travelers. They would sit quietly as Sister Agnes played a few pieces on the piano. She never announced what she would play. She simply sat down, closed her eyes for a moment, and began. Her music had a way of making even restless children fall silent. There was something pure about it, something that seemed to reach beyond sound. It wasn't about showing skill or talent. It was about sharing peace. When she finished, there was never loud applause. People just sat for a moment, breathing softly, and then stood up slowly as if leaving something sacred behind. One afternoon, a man with gray hair approached her after a performance. He introduced himself as a conductor from a famous orchestra in the city. "I watched your video many times," he said with deep respect. "Would you consider performing one piece with our orchestra at our charity concert next month? It would be an honor." The idea made her smile, but she shook her head gently. "I thank you, but I don't belong to the stage anymore. My music lives here in this small place." He understood her meaning, but still insisted. "Perhaps you could think about it. The concert is for orphaned children. It would bring hope to many." That night she prayed for guidance. She sat by the piano afterward, thinking about the children who had no homes, no one to comfort them. Slowly, her decision became clear. She would go, not for fame, but for them. When she told Father Thomas, the next morning he smiled and said, "Then let us make it happen." The news spread quickly. The idea of an elderly nun performing with a great orchestra moved people deeply. Tickets for the concert sold out within hours. Everyone wanted to witness it. As the day of the concert came closer, Sister Agnes practiced quietly in the convent chapel. She didn't practice for perfection. She practiced for feeling. She wanted the music to speak, not her fingers. The younger sisters often stood by the door, listening in silence. Sometimes one of them would whisper, "It sounds like heaven." When the night of the concert arrived, the grand hall in the city was filled with light and excitement. People dressed elegantly, cameras flashed, and reporters filled the corridors. Yet when Sister Agnes stepped onto the stage, everything went still. She walked slowly, dressed in her simple gray habit, her white veil neat and clean. She looked small beside the huge orchestra, but there was something powerful about her presence, quiet and steady, like the calm before a sunrise. The conductor bowed to her and smiled. She nodded softly, then sat at the piano. The lights dimmed. A soft hush fell over the audience. The piece began with gentle strings, then the piano entered, her hands moving with grace. Every note carried warmth and tenderness. She played not with strength, but with truth. The music rose and fell like breathing, like prayer. People forgot they were in a concert hall. It felt instead like they were sitting inside a story being told without words. Halfway through the piece, a child in the front row began to cry quietly, not out of sadness, but because the sound reminded him of something pure, something safe. His mother held him close, and even she began to weep softly. Around the hall, many eyes filled with tears. The music spoke to something deep in everyone, the longing for kindness, for love that never ends. When the final note faded, there was silence for several seconds. Then the hall erupted in applause. But Sister Agnes only smiled gently, bowed her head, and whispered a short prayer before standing up. She didn't bow grandly or wave. She simply walked away slowly, leaving the echo of her music behind. That performance was broadcast on television and online, and within hours, millions more had watched it. People around the world spoke about her. Some called her the nun of the piano. Others called her the voice of grace. But in the convent, life stayed the same. She continued her chores, tended the garden, and helped the younger sisters with their duties. When asked how she felt about her fame, she only said, "Fame fades like morning mist, but kindness lasts longer." A few weeks later, she received a letter from a child who lived in an orphanage. The letter was written with shaky handwriting. It said, "When you played, I felt like someone was hugging me. Thank you for making me feel seen." She held the letter for a long time, her eyes wet with quiet tears. "This," she whispered, "is why I played." The convent soon decided to start free music lessons for children who couldn't afford them. Sister Agnes became the teacher. Every afternoon, the chapel filled with laughter and clumsy notes as little fingers tried to find the right keys. She never raised her voice, never scolded anyone. If a child hit a wrong note, she would smile and say, "There are no wrong notes in learning, only new chances." She would tell them stories while teaching. "When I was young," she said one day, "I thought music was about impressing people. But then I learned it is about expressing what cannot be said. You play not to be heard, but to be understood." The children loved her gentle way of teaching. They would bring her small gifts, a drawing, a flower, or a handmade card. She kept them all in a small wooden box near her piano. It became her treasure chest of love. One afternoon, while she was teaching, she noticed one boy sitting quietly at the back of the room, not playing. She walked to him and asked softly, "Why aren't you trying?" He looked down and said, "Because I don't think I can be good like you." She knelt beside him and said gently, "When I was your age, I thought the same. But do you know a secret? Every beautiful song starts with one wrong note. You just have to keep going until it finds its way." The boy smiled faintly and placed his fingers on the keys. The sound that came out was uneven, but she nodded with pride. "See, the song has begun," she whispered. Her lessons became known throughout the region. Parents brought their children from far away just to learn from her. But she never charged anything. "Music is a gift," she would say. "You do not sell what was given freely." As months passed, her health began to weaken. She tired easily, but she never complained. Father Thomas noticed her slowing steps and said, "You must rest more, sister." She smiled softly. "When the music in me is done, I will rest," she said. Even in those quiet moments, she continued to write small pieces of music in her old notebook. She said they were for the children to play after she was gone. Each piece was short and simple, but full of warmth like a soft sunrise. The young music teacher from the town often came to help with the children. Together, they planned to open a small music school beside the convent. They wanted it to be a place where no child was ever turned away. When Sister Agnes saw the first drawings of the building, she smiled deeply. "This," she said softly, "is the real concert." One evening, after a long day of teaching, she sat by the piano alone. The hall was quiet except for the ticking of an old clock. She placed her hands on the keys and began to play one of her new songs. It was slow and tender, like a goodbye. The sound floated through the convent halls and out into the garden, where the wind carried it among the trees. When she finished, she looked up at the statue of the Virgin Mary near the altar and whispered, "Thank you for letting me play." Then she smiled, a smile full of peace. That night, when the other sisters passed by the chapel, they saw the piano still open and a small candle flickering beside it. On the stand, her music book lay open to her last written piece. It was titled Grace. Her music had traveled from a small convent to the entire world, but her heart had never left the piano. And somewhere, in homes and schools across the days at the convent grew slower after that winter. The flowers outside the chapel started blooming again, and their soft colors filled the courtyard with quiet beauty. The children still came every afternoon for lessons, their laughter echoing between the stone walls. The sound of piano keys drifted through the halls like sunlight, but Sister Agnes was not as strong as before. Her steps had become smaller, her hands trembled a little, and her breath sometimes caught when she spoke for too long. Yet, no one ever heard her complain. She still woke early, prayed before sunrise, and smiled at everyone who passed by. Each day, she would sit near the piano, guiding the children gently. Sometimes she just watched them play instead of joining in. Her eyes would follow their little fingers, and she would smile softly, whispering, "That's it. Let the music breathe. Don't rush." The children adored her. They could sense something pure in her presence. When she laughed, it made them laugh too. When she looked proud, they felt like they had achieved something great. She had become like a grandmother to all of them, gentle, loving, and endlessly patient. Father Thomas often worried about her health. "You've done enough, sister," he said one morning. "Let others carry the work now." She smiled faintly. "I will stop when the song ends," she replied in her calm, peaceful way. As spring turned to summer, her story continued to spread quietly. The world had not forgotten her. People from faraway countries still sent letters. Some asked for blessings, others simply thanked her for reminding them what beauty sounded like. A few sent photos of their children learning piano, inspired by her story. She looked at every photo with a warm smile and said, "Look how far the music has traveled." The small music school beside the convent was finally built that year. It was simple, with white walls, big windows, and a few pianos placed neatly in each room. On the day it opened, the children decorated the entrance with flowers and ribbons. The whole town came to celebrate. There was laughter, music, and the smell of fresh bread from the kitchen. When it was time for Sister Agnes to say a few words, she stood slowly, holding the microphone with trembling hands. Her voice was soft but steady. "This place," she said, "is not mine. It belongs to every child who believes in something beautiful. Music has no age, no color, no borders. It belongs to every heart that listens." The crowd clapped, not loudly, but with deep warmth. Some people wiped tears from their eyes. She smiled, bowed her head gently, and returned to her seat. After the ceremony, she sat by the piano in the new school and played a small tune she had written herself, simple, cheerful, full of life. The children surrounded her, swaying gently with the rhythm. It was a song of joy, of new beginnings, and of gratitude. When she finished, one little girl ran up and hugged her. "You made the piano happy," the girl said. Sister Agnes laughed softly. "No, my dear, you did." In the weeks that followed, she spent most of her time in the new school. Sometimes she sat quietly by the window while the young music teacher led the lessons. Other times she played short melodies to encourage the children. Everyone could feel that her strength was fading, but her spirit was still bright. One evening, after all the children had gone home, she stayed alone in the music room. The sun was setting, and the orange light touched the piano keys like gold. She opened her old notebook, the one she had carried for years. It was full of her handwritten songs, notes, and small messages. She turned to the last page, which was still blank. Slowly, she wrote a few lines at the bottom. "Music is the echo of kindness. Play it with love and it will never die." Then she closed the book and placed it on top of the piano. She sat there for a long time, watching the sky darken. The stars began to appear one by one, and a soft wind moved through the open window, touching her face gently. She closed her eyes, whispering a small prayer of thanks, for the life she had lived, for the children she had taught, and for the chance to share the song that had waited so long in her heart. That night the convent was silent, except for the sound of crickets outside. The sisters went to their rooms after evening prayer. When Father Thomas passed by the chapel, he noticed a faint light inside. Curious, he stepped closer and saw Sister Agnes sitting at the piano, her hands resting on the keys. She looked peaceful, her eyes closed, a small smile on her face. The candle beside her flickered softly. For a moment he stood there, not wanting to disturb the quiet grace before him. Then he whispered a prayer and gently closed the door. The next morning, when the sisters came to wake her, she was still sitting there, calm, serene, and at peace. The sunlight touched her face, and it seemed as if she was only resting. On the piano, her last written piece lay open, titled Grace. Word of her passing spread quickly. People came from everywhere to pay their respects. The little chapel was filled with flowers, and the piano was covered in white lilies. The children she had taught sat in the front row, holding their instruments, their eyes red but full of love. During the service, Father Thomas spoke softly to the crowd. She came into this world quietly, lived humbly, and left behind a sound that will never fade, he said. Her music taught us that faith can be heard, and love can be felt through every note. After the service, the children played one of her songs together, the same piece she had written for them. Their hands trembled, but they played with all their hearts. The melody floated through the air, soft and beautiful, like a farewell carried by the wind. When the last note ended, there was silence. Even the birds outside seemed to stop singing for a moment. Then one of the younger nuns whispered, "She's home now." In the weeks that followed, the convent felt emptier without her. Her chair by the window remained in its place. Her teacup still sat on the small table beside it. But her presence was still everywhere. In the piano keys, in the songs the children played, in the quiet smiles of those she had touched. The young music teacher continued her work, teaching the children the way Sister Agnes had taught, with patience and heart. She often told them stories about the gentle nun who had taught the world what true music sounded like. Sometimes late in the evening, when the children had gone and the rooms were quiet, she would sit at the same piano and play one of Sister Agnes's melodies. And somehow it always felt as if she wasn't playing alone. The air seemed to hum with a soft warmth, as if the music itself remembered. Months later, Father Thomas decided to release a small book of Sister Agnes's music and letters. It was called The Songs of Grace. The book contained her handwritten notes, her simple teachings, and her final message. It became a source of comfort to many. Musicians from around the world played her compositions in schools, churches, and hospitals. Some said her music helped people heal. Others said it helped them find peace. Years passed, but her legacy continued to grow. The music school by the convent became famous for its spirit of kindness. People called it the House of Grace, named after her final song. Children from all backgrounds came to learn there, rich, poor, and orphaned alike. The rule was simple. Everyone played together and everyone helped each other. Every year on the anniversary of her passing, the children gathered in the chapel and played her songs. The townspeople came to listen, and the hall filled with light and warmth. Father Thomas, now older and slower, would sit at the front and smile, whispering to himself. Her song never ended. It only changed voices. And somewhere beyond the sound of the piano, beyond the open sky and the passing years, it felt as if Sister Agnes was still there, listening, smiling, her heart still alive in every note. Her story had begun with silence, with a woman told she was too old to play, but it had ended with music that reached every corner of the world. She had proven that beauty has no age, and that a single act of faith, even a simple song, can touch lives far beyond what the heart can imagine. In the end, her greatest performance was not on any stage. It was in the hearts she opened, the children she inspired, and the love she left behind. Her piano remained in the chapel, polished and cared for. And sometimes, when the night was very quiet, the sisters swore they could hear a faint sound, a few soft notes played as if by unseen hands. It was gentle, like a lullaby. It was her way of saying, "I'm still here, the song goes on." And indeed it did.